Welcome to episode 356 of the DFO Rundown. My partner in crime, Jason Gregor, still has his bald ass head in the sand in Hawaii, which means we are incredibly fortunate to be joined today by the one, the only Craig Button of TSN, who is still laughing about my intro about Jason Gregor. How you doing, Craig?
I'm laughing. I'm good. I'm laughing about me too, because a lot of people are happy. There's only one and only one Craig Buttons. The world doesn't need more than one, Frank.
I don't know. I think the world might be a better place with more
Yeah.
Craig Buttons.
I don't
But
know. I love Hawaii. It's not where Gregor's. It's not where good for him. We always used to go to Hawaii. We haven't gone there in a few years since the pandemic, but good for him.
Yeah, must be nice. Before we get rolling, I'm legally obligated to tell you that the DFO Rundown is brought to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Use promo code NATION, that's NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. They've got you lined up for everything, including the Super Bowl this weekend. Craig, so much has happened in the NHL over the last 4 or 5 days, and got to start with the JT Miller trade. Going from Vancouver to the New York Rangers feels like the perfect fit for the Rangers, a guy that is obviously intimately familiar with the organization, having played there previously. His best friend is there, and Vincent Trocheck, who he just said, hey, I didn't even ask. I just moved right in with him. And also, you see his play on the ice. He hits the ground running again. First game with the Rangers, 2 goals, and looks like someone that fits like a glove for what the Rangers want to do.
I would say everything you just said, same. And then I want to ask you at the end of this, I got a question for you, Frank, just on the overall landscape. JT Miller's a difference maker. And I think for the New York Rangers, you watch Mika Zibanejad, and Mika Zibanejad just isn't quite as capable to carry the burden as a lead center anymore. Vincent Trocheck's a good center, and I think that JT Miller now, who can do the heavy lifting, he can really do the heavy lifting. You can put him against anybody in the league, you can match him up. He takes it on as a big challenge, and he meets those challenges. I mean, I love JT Miller, like absolutely love him. We all watched as the drama unfolded in Vancouver. And JT Miller with the full no move clause, could dictate where he was going to go to. I think for the Vancouver Canucks, they needed to clear that out, like clear their plate, so to speak. With the situation, Jim Rutherford was very forthcoming. But for the Rangers, I think the salary is good, $8 million. He's locked in, and he's not just locked into contract. He's locked into winning. He plays. When you talk about the mindset of a winner, that's JT Miller. I mean, there's nothing that he leaves you short on. When it's funny because Frank, watching him this year, and I know he missed some games, he left, and they say, well, he's a little bit off. He's just about a point a game player. I mean, who doesn't want a point a game player that plays hard as JT?
I'm with you. And look, we're talking about one of the top 15 players in the league over the last couple years. So I get it totally from the Rangers' perspective. People have said, hey, what about that contract 5 years from now? Yeah, okay, fine. Fair question to ask. But what do you tell Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox, Artemi Panarin, and the rest of the Rangers core that was, prior to this season and the wheels falling off, was pretty damn good. So I love the fit from the Rangers' perspective. I mean, they really didn't give up a ton. And I get ripping the Band-Aid off if you're Vancouver. So look, the return isn't perfect. Philip Hedl, with both his injury history and his production, he wasn't even the best center traded last week. That was Morgan Frost. But when you look at the next move for the Vancouver Canucks, that's the part that lost me. Okay, so you trade Miller, fine. That first round pick, which could have been an incredibly valuable asset. I mean, if the Rangers, if that ends up being top 13 protected this year, which is not out of the realm of possibility, it slides to 2026 unprotected, which what if the Rangers blow it up between now and then? That could be a really valuable pick. And you have that burn a hole in your pocket for Marcus Pettersson, who you could have got at any point over the last 2 years. Help me out here. Like I'm missing the dot being connected from this Canucks team going from Miller, okay, fine, we got to make the trade, to then a couple hours later, Marcus Pettersson. I don't get it.
It would be one thing. Yeah, no, Frank, I'm with you on that. It would be one thing if Marcus Pettersson had contract term left. I mean, and maybe they sign him. Maybe they say, hey, listen, we have the inside track on signing
That's the
him.
worst thing you could do.
Yeah,
So now you feel like
yeah,
you're obligated to sign him because you then traded the first round pick for him.
but Jim and Patrick know Marcus. They traded for him like when he was in Pittsburgh, and I would imagine that they would like to keep Marcus Pettersson. So whatever it is. But to your point, I'm going to go back to what Jim Rutherford said to the Globe and Mail to Gary Mason. He said, yeah, you know what? We're going to have to be able to put ourselves back into a contending situation. If we trade somebody, we might not be able to get the value we want. He was really talking about JT Miller, because that's what, I mean, without saying JT Miller, he was talking about where he was limited because of JT's no move clause.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'll have to be other moves. Well, the Vancouver Canucks are no closer to contending now than when they had JT Miller.
They're further away. We knew they would be further away because you weren't going to win the Miller trade. The issue is now they've doubled down the wrong direction, because I just think Pettersson has significant limitations. They've talked all year about we need to get an efficient puck mover. That's been right at the very top of Rick Tockett's list. Marcus Pettersson, he can't make the pass for me. It's little dinks and dunks, chips off the boards. He's not an efficient puck mover. He may be a fine and steady defender, but I think on a really good team, Marcus Pettersson is closer to a 5 than he is a 4. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. And again, you're right. You can say handcuffed or whatnot, but you can't say that we're going to we got to move ourselves back to contending position and then make this move, in my view, because they're not a contender. They could very easily miss the playoffs. I mean, that's where their team finds themselves. So it was confusing to me. And again, with giving up the first round draft pick, and hey, good for Kyle Dubas. Kyle Dubas gets a first round draft pick. I think that he's signaling that listen, the rebuild's on in Pittsburgh. Who are we kidding? Like the rebuild's on. Like they can call it whatever they want. He's accumulated a whole bunch of picks, first and second round picks. He's trying to get some younger players in there, picked up Tomasino on waivers. That's what he's trying to do. I mean, you don't have to come out to say it publicly that we're rebuilding, retooling, but he's doing it. His actions speak volumes. But to your point, when it feels like Vancouver right now is hopeful that maybe just eking into the playoffs is enough of a reward for what they've gone through this year. It's very interesting to me. But my
then
question,
if they sign Pettersson, so then what? Then you're locked in. And I get you always want to accumulate as many quality defensemen as you can. And by the way, an underrated part of or part that wasn't talked about very much was moving off of the Danton Heinen and Vinny Desharnais contract. So if you think about it from that perspective, yes, Kyle Dubas did well, but he essentially bought himself up to a first round pick as opposed to the other way around by taking on those 2 deals.
Yeah. He took on those deals. You're right. They each have a year left on them. So I just want to quickly go back to you, Frank, in your history and your expertise. How surprising was it that these moves occurred at this point in time?
Not really surprising at all. I mean, some people had thought, hey, maybe does this 3-game winning streak that Vancouver's on buy them a little time? I think what happened was, at least what I was told was, the Rangers had gotten this deal to the finish line previously. Chris Drury got the deal done. It was Hedl, a first-round pick, that same one that ended up moving, and a prospect. I don't know if that was Mancini or not. But then when he took it up the flagpole to get it approved, as any manager does by ownership, that's where they ran into an issue, and ownership said, we're not taking on JT Miller's contract in full. So when you look at the deal that ends up being completed, they got I guess a couple extra pieces in addition to Miller, if you want to include Brandstrom. But that's what kind of helped push that over the line. And when Miller was, I think JT got to the point where he just said, look, I can see what the president's saying about it. I can see what this situation and how it's unfolded. it's just time. And so he was ready to go. I don't think he was completely stubborn on the Rangers part of it. That was 100% his preferred destination, but I think he was willing to consider some other places along the way. I think Carolina, I think Colorado, there's a few other teams that had expressed interest, but the Rangers, that connection with Trocheck, I mean, you see the pictures from their minor hockey days in Pittsburgh. They had been friends since they were 9. I also think the other aspect of this from the Rangers is, him and Trocheck are tight, but you're also probably going to get a player that's on his best behavior for a while. He knows that, there aren't any hiccups here. And I admire JT Miller so much for what he is. He's unabashedly himself. Like, he doesn't try and be anyone else. He has emotions. He wears them on his sleeve. And man, he just competes. Like, I'll take JT Miller on my team any day. And I understand the value proposition that Vancouver was faced with. We've either got a 26-year-old in Pettersson here, or we've got Miller here. Which one does it make sense for our organization to trade? I get how they arrived at that point. I still think they picked the wrong guy, to be quite honest. Like, I would have traded Elias Pettersson without hesitating, because I'm just not convinced that he's a driver. I know JT Miller's a driver. I think Elias Pettersson can be an elite supporting player, but I don't think he's a driver.
I can't. I concur with a lot of what you're saying. And $11.6 million, you need a driver at that price. And do you think, Frank, that his price tag for 7 years out also maybe inhibited the Vancouver Canucks from making a trade of value for Pettersson?
No, because I think there's enough teams still interested in.
Okay.
They think that he can get to that level. They've seen it, they've seen the 40 goals and 100+ points, and they think, man, this is, there's still something to unlock here at 26. But I'll tell you this, he's on the clock. And Patrick Allvin made that clear in no uncertain terms after this trade, that Pettersson has not played up to the level of expectation, and that they expect a lot more. And I first off, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Pettersson is still moved before this deadline. But if you don't get back to being close to that player, I think you have to trade him before his full no trade kicks in on July 1. I don't think you have a choice.
It's interesting, right? So this could be one of many moves that this still occurred. Well, back to Jim Rutherford's point. You know what? We got to put ourselves back in the contending position. Do they think that Elias Pettersson can be the guy to lead them there? We'll see. But he certainly hasn't played very well for well over. He hasn't. He when you start
a full
celebrating,
calendar year of sample size now.
That's what I mean. And I mean, people keep saying, well, he's playing better defensively. Oh, really? Well, every defensive player in the league is going to be asking for $11.6 million then.
It's such a great point. And I guess where I'm at is I could be convinced the other way, but I need to see a lot. Like, there's a million things about Pettersson's game that I don't like. I didn't like the playoffs. I didn't like the excuse making afterwards. And I know the Canucks didn't like it either, about the tendonitis in his knee. And then to follow all that up, knowing that you need a big next season, for Jim Rutherford to come out last week and say point blank that you weren't ready, that's on you. There's no one else's fault except your own. And I think his attitude is what has gotten in the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, attitude is part of everybody's, daily focus. Like, what is your attitude coming into today? And you control your attitude. Go back to JT Miller. He changes the competitive tenor of the New York Rangers. And you can match him up against any top player in the Eastern Conference, and he'll take it on. And he's going to be in for a penny, in for a pound. So I think it's just a really good move to put the New York Rangers back into a much better place. And certainly their play, I mean, winning on Sunday was a big win for them against a very good team. Finding a way to get that win was really important for the Rangers.
And just to put a bow on it from the Vancouver perspective, you mentioned the comments from Jim Rutherford about getting back to being a contending team. What if you have to trade Pettersson. And that's Miller and Pettersson, to the backbone of your team down the middle, gone. How do you possibly sell that to Quinn Hughes that, hey, this guy's been otherworldly. Quinn Hughes deserves, with the gap between himself and his next closest teammate now, 25 points. He deserves Hart Trophy consideration this year if they make the playoffs. But what do you do next? Like, how could you possibly win either of those trades when you're moving the best player?
All that ends up happening, Frank, and you know this as well as anybody. Now, the daily focus will be to Quinn Hughes. What's your plans? What's your plans? How do you feel? What's your
How
plans?
quickly are you
You know,
getting to New Jersey?
yeah. Well, the contract, it just becomes a constant. It's just another part. I'm not going to call it a distraction, but it becomes another part of the drama that's been going on in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm. So that was not the only trade on the weekend. The San Jose Sharks and Dallas Stars move a significant amount of money, with both Cody Ceci and Mikael Granlund going from San Jose to Dallas in exchange for a first-round pick and a fourth that can become a third if the Stars reach the Stanley Cup final this year. Really like this from San Jose's perspective. I think Mike Grier has low-key had one of the best last calendar years of any GM in the league. Just has gone about his business and stacked smart move on top of smart move. And the reason why I like it is because he took on Granlund as part of the Carlson deal salary dump. He ends up getting a quality asset in return. Same thing. Cody Ceci takes him on from that deal with Edmonton in the summer involving Ty Emerson. And they didn't have any salary retention transaction slots left, and yet is still able to trade both those players at full boat, mostly because the Dallas Stars are one of the few teams who could make it happen because they've got so much LTIR money from Tyler Seguin. So I can understand it definitely from San Jose's perspective. I guess I'm less convinced of this deal from the Dallas point of view, because at this juncture, as much as Dallas needed some help on their back end, and not necessarily because of the Miro Heiskanen injury, I thought they were thin before that. Cody Ceci isn't a needle mover for me. And beyond that, I'm just worried about Granlund and how quickly he gets up to speed, because he's shown in the past that when he's moved, it takes him a little while to get adjusted. And he's had a great season, but are these the best two difference makers that Jim Nill could have found for almost $9 million in salary?
Yeah, it's a good question. And let me just echo what you said about Mike Grier. Mike Grier has a very clear focus and direction where he's taking the San Jose Sharks. And I whether it be, understanding that, how I'm going to relieve myself of some long-term contracts, and like, look what he did getting a number one goaltender in a Skarov. That all began with Hurdle, and then he's acted when the opportunity has arisen, and I think he's really positioned his team to continue to move forward in a really good, strong manner. And I think the future looks bright for San Jose. As it pertains to Dallas, when you start to think about, okay, a fourth, maybe going to a third, okay, that's fine. First round pick, it's really a second round pick. I was in Dallas a couple weeks ago, and having watched Dallas, their right side defense has no chance to help that. Everybody talks about the Dallas Stars being a Stanley Cup contender, not with that right side defense.
I've been saying it for weeks. If you have Matt Dumba and that crew lining up as your right side, it's no good.
It isn't. So Nils Lundqvist is out for the year with an injury. Then you have Matt Dumba, and then you have Ilya Lyubushkin. I just think that Cody Ceci is just an upgrade. He's an upgrade on that adds some experience. Cody's not a needle mover, but they needed an NHL player. And they got that in Cody Ceci. Granlund, to me, with the number of Finns they have in the lineup, and they, with Seguin being out, they're trying to find a little bit. I think Jim absolutely weighed in that. Okay, we have some players and some support mechanisms that can get Granlund up to speed. Because if Granlund can take his play that he's been excellent in San Jose this year, if he can take that play and bring it into Dallas, I think that Dallas, they want to push 3 lines of offense. That's where they want to push. They're not looking to get a shutdown third line that checks. They want to push offense right through their first 3 lines. Mason Marchment's back in the lineup now. So I think it's just, and Granlund has every incentive now, being a free agent this coming summer, to get in there and get up to speed quick. So I see it as, I know what the money is, and you're right. There's only so many places that Mike Greer could find a way. I think the Heiskanen injury contributed to a certain extent because they need another body in there. Those are big minutes that Heiskanen plays, and who are you going to throw in there? You're not going to throw in Liam Bichelle to carry those minutes. And we talked about the right side. It'll be, if Granlund can get in there and play and really drive that play, and Ceci just goes in there and just is steady, that's a good defensive team. And Cody Ceci doesn't have to go in and be anything more than just be efficient, Cody, and you can help that team. So good move for San Jose. I think for Jim Nill, last year he traded for Tanev, and then Hakanpää got hurt, and the blue line was short, and they got right to the conference final, but they were thin on the back end. I think Jim is.
That's probably why they lost in the conference final, is because they were.
I agree, Frank. I agree. So anyway, I don't see it as a big price to pay, and much like we talked about, where's JT Miller going to be in 5 years? I mean, it's amazing, Frank. And where are they going to be in 5 years? Like the first round draft pick, that's a late first round draft pick. Well, that pick might help you in 5 years. Like, teams are focused in on, I'm not telling you, nobody should be silly. Nobody should compromise their future. But, we hear this all the time. Oh, 5 years, first round. That's when the first round draft pick with Dallas, if it can produce, will be coming into play. What's Dallas going to do? Forgo potentially 5 years? And JT Miller, to me, the way he plays, and I'll wait to see if he falls off before I'm going to be worried about the last 5 years of his contract.
I agree. But here, I just am curious, though, to drill down on this draft pick from this sense. Jim Nill had only traded 1 first-round pick prior to this, and that was in the Nils-Lundqvist deal in his tenure. You could argue that no team in the league has drafted better with their picks than Dallas. If that's the case, is this Dallas signaling to us that they just don't believe they can get a difference maker with where they were picking with this year's draft crop?
We go through that draft. I mean, the draft where they drafted Heiskanen, Ottinger, and Robertson was unbelievable. I mean, but Heiskanen was a top pick. So you're not trading that pick. Ottinger was a later first round pick, and then Robertson was a second round pick. They drafted Stankoven in the second round. They drafted really good players at different points of the draft, and I think that's going back. I think what it signaled is, Jim Nill is realistic. If you think you're getting a difference maker later on in the first round, you're kidding yourself. What you're hoping to get is a player that can come in and contribute to your team in some way, shape, or form. The fact that they got a number 1 goaltender, Ottinger, late in the first round, the fact that they got Robertson in the second round, every team has those. But when they drafted Jason Robertson, they weren't going, boy, do we have a difference maker here. And I think that Jim understands that from the scouting background and says, this is what we got to do right now. What's interesting is that last year, Jim gave up a second round draft pick for Chris Tanev. And, now you're giving up, you're getting Granlund as well as Cody Ceci. I think you're also looking at the draft, Frank. I think they're looking at the draft and going, the assessment of the draft is, if we're going to trade, let's trade this year's first round draft pick, because the feeling would probably be that it's not as strong or as deep.
Yeah, that's what it signaled to me, is that they just believe there's less of a chance to get someone than maybe some other years. So if you're going to do it, this is the year. Agreed. I guess just looking at the overall marketplace, I'd ask the same question that I asked of Vancouver. If you're moving this pick, is this the best you can do? Is Marcus Pettersson the best you can get? Is Cody Ceci and Mikael Granlund the best you can get? Maybe. I just think there's still a lot to unfold over these last 5 weeks, 32 days before the trade deadline. I think there's still more to come, and I think there's going to be some names that probably end up surprising teams. Never going to criticize anyone for taking a leap and getting their business done ahead of time. I just wonder, is this the best you could do? That's all. Fair question to ask.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's fair, and we continue to evaluate as time goes on. I would add one more factor into there too, when not a factor, but to go into your question, is this the best you can do? With the news about the salary cap being locked in for the next 3 years past this year, like that also opens up with the certainty of the salary cap, like that also opens up different opportunities too. So, there's an opportunity cost to maybe acting right now as well, like
Well,
with other players, right? Like that, because teams are going to be saying, well, like you start to have those conversations now. You can act now too. You don't have to wait till July, till the end of the season.
Well, I got a great example for you. I have my new trade targets board out today, and Seth Jones is now pretty prominently featured at $9.5 million. When you know that the cap is going up to 113.5 in 3 years from now, 9.5 seems a lot more palatable now for Seth Jones. And if I'm Dallas, look, Seth Jones is no stranger to the Dallas area. His dad, obviously, Popeye Jones, is a fixture there. He's signaled before that that's the place that if he's going to move and waive his no trade, no move, that's a place he'd like to go. If I'm the Dallas Stars, I'm just reevaluating the board here saying, hey, this is someone that can play. He's averaged 25-18 a night in 4 years in Chicago. He's 30 years old. I don't have any concerns about how Seth Jones is going to age on the age curve chart. Like effortless, dynamic skater. And I think if you lock him into a winning environment, you're going to get a little bit of a different Seth Jones than you've seen with the Blackhawks of late. There's just, first off, too much heavy lifting. Can't do it all yourself. And second, there's nothing to play for. And there hasn't been anything to play for since training camp every year. So if I'm Dallas, I'm going, well, okay, Cody, Ceci, and Granlund, great. We used our draft capital fine, but is Seth Jones perhaps a better fit for the long haul of the Dallas Stars than what we just traded for?
I think you just nailed it, Frank, when you talk about, like, okay, so, the burden, lack of support, and then the spirit, right? Like, the players, Seth's a competitor. I've watched Seth for too long. He's a competitor. Listen, the Dallas Stars, because of their blue line, because of the other players they have on that blue line that are so good, there's no question that Seth Jones will go in there and play very well, in my view. So to your point, maybe Jim Nill's waiting till the offseason. It might be too late though. But again, there's opportunity cost now. And again, trying to change your mindset to say, wait a sec, we know what the salary cap is. Why don't we act now? So some of the calls that I feel like if I'm giving advice to managers, don't be just phoning on the UFAs. To your point, like phone on these guys with terms, because we have certainty now. We have certainty now in the system with the payroll range. So let's go.
And it's way higher than everyone thought.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many managers I talked to last week. They were blown away by how much room they're going to have, and not only that, but for some of them, how much they're going to have to spend. That they weren't really planned, like in a bad way. Like, hey, we're going to have to now spend money that we don't really want to spend.
Well, it's good for the system, though. And what it speaks to is the health of the league. So, if the economic health of the league is good and somebody might not want to spend based on their own internal cap, well, the league's healthy. This is what you're required to do.
Yeah, it's probably too healthy for some teams, I would imagine.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, I'm fit as a fiddle, but I'm not so happy about that.
Yeah, well,
I like to have my body fat up to a little bit higher than 5.4%.
Yeah. Something I've never said. Quickly before we bring in Tyler Yaremchuk for fill in the blank, Morgan Frost gets his first goal as a Calgary Flame over the weekend. I mentioned this earlier in the pod, and if you picked up on it, I said Philip Hedl was not the best center traded last week, and obviously JT Miller was, but Morgan Frost. Look, I just think when you look at this from Calgary's perspective, they add two guys on a team that's really struggled to score. I think a minimum of 45 goals between Farabee and Frost. I think they could be higher than that. If you said to me 1 year from now, hey, Morgan Frost is having a 65 point or 70 point season, I wouldn't be shocked. I just think him and Farabee were so beaten down in Philly and needed a change of scenery, that this made too much sense. But I have to tell you, after thinking about this deal from the Flyers' perspective a bit over the weekend, my tune has changed on it a little bit from their point of view, in the sense that I think this brings them closer to the bottom, which is a good thing in the short term. Those two guys were not going to be part of their future plans as long as John Tortorella was there. There's no way to get enough out of them to make them a staple as part of your plans. And the Flyers didn't want to pay Morgan Frost to begin with. But in the meantime, the Flyers have now done something they've never done in their history. They've gone 3 consecutive games being shut out. Not advocating or saying that's a good thing, but if you've listened to this pod regularly, you've heard me say that this team, they're not set up for what they ultimately need to get to, which is to find more difference makers. John Tortorella, say whatever you want about him, too good of a coach. He's not. He's gotten everything out of that team that you could possibly wring out of them, to the point where last year they're in a playoff spot, 3rd place in the Metro, all the way until March, and then the wheels fall off. This year, again, overachieving. They have to get back to picking in the top 5. And I think they've gotten away from that these last 2 years. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I like your thinking on that. We'll get into Calgary real quickly in a second, but for the Philadelphia Flyers, you use the term difference makers. And if you don't have difference makers, you're going to have a tough time winning in this league. You just are. And what are the difference makers? We talked about it earlier with Dallas. Yeah, you get difference makers. Yeah, David Pastrnak's a difference maker. He's the 25th pick in the draft, right? Jake Ottinger's a difference maker. But you're not thinking of those guys as difference makers when teams are passing them. That's why they end up in that spot. And I think Boston and Dallas and other teams that have drafted players, Tampa Bay with Kucherov, they're not going, geez, we got our difference maker in the late 2nd round, but you end up with them. But you have to look at the draft with respect to that's the place. So interestingly enough, Frank, when I was like you, I go, okay, so they got some younger players. They got some younger players coming in, but this draft now is center heavy in the top 5-6 spots. It's center heavy. You got Hagens, you got Misa, you got Desnoyers, you got Frondell, some really, really good, in my view, centers. And if you want a good center,
Are they difference makers?
Well, I think they can. I mean, that's the assessment that Phil Dog is going to have to make. But you're not getting them at 11 or 12 or 14. You're going to have to move into, to your point, you're going to have to be picking in the top 5 or 6. So wherever that shakes out for you, if you're not in the top 5 or 6, you're stuck. You're not going to get them.
Yeah, I think Jet Luchenko is a fine player, but I just don't. I think he's closer to being Scott Laughton than a difference maker. And that's not any disrespect to Scott Laughton, a good NHL player. But that's the part that I'm struggling with, is when you start to stack these guys up from a Flyers perspective. Okay, Matvei Michkov, difference maker. Who's the next guy on the list?
In the young group, well, I mean, Konechny's a difference maker, but he's locked up long term. And but you bottom line is, Frank, and you know this, on the blue line, up the middle of the ice, in the net, do the Flyers have a difference maker? We talked about the San Jose Sharks earlier. Celebrini a difference maker. Sam Dickinson's going to be a difference maker. Askarov can be a difference maker. Key positions. Will Smith has got the potential to be a difference maker. So you start to look.
They've checked all those boxes in the last calendar of the year. That's the thing.
And that's what you're saying. That's why I go back there. And again, when I look at the draft, Frank, like people go best player available. Like if you're not a difference maker, you're not going to be in the top part of my draft. And I'm talking top 3, top 5. You're not in there. Like, and I'm not saying you're not going to be a skilled player. You're not going to be able to play in the league. But my top guys are always going to be. If you ask me, is that guy a difference maker? Yep.
I'm also wondering if the Flyers are going to regret trading out of that pick when they could have taken Zeev Buium.
Yes.
I mean, right there, he's right in front of you, and you say, you know what? We're going to pass. He falls a little bit. And like, I watch him, World Junior. I mean, I think the entire hockey world overrates one tournament in time. But every time I watch him, I'm like, Zeev Buium, difference maker.
I thought he was the best defenseman in the draft last year. Simply put, I said it at the time. Nothing's changed my mind on Zeev. He reminds me so much of Scott Niedermayer. They control the game.
Wow. That's heady praise, and it's going to be interesting to watch him take that step. I mean, Minnesota, you look at their blue line. I mean, look how well positioned they are. Brock Faber, Zeev Buium, David Jiricek. Like, set it and forget it. If you're Bill Guerin, you've got your D figured out for the next 10 years. Now it's going to be, you got Kaprizov and you lock him up. Then how many other difference makers can we find? And, oh, by the way, another positional box checked with Jesper Wallstedt.
Yeah, and you have Matt Boldy, heavy winger. Marco Rossi's really found his way. You got Joel Eriksson-Ek, right? Like, and they got lots of cap spaces coming summer with the Suter and Parisi buyouts, just being really reduced, and the cap going up. Like, Frank, I mean, you do your job as well as anybody in the business, and I'm just going to say, all eyes should be on Minnesota going forward, because if I'm a competitor of Minnesota, they're the team that I go, oh boy. Can they push this? You talk about moving the needle. Bill Guerin has a chance, and he moved the needle a few years ago when he said, "I got to buy out Suter and Parisi." He had to reset the organization, and boy, has he done a great job.
Yeah, well, he didn't make it onto my trade board this time because I'm curious to see how the rising salary cap impacts it. But I'm not convinced that the Minnesota Wild are going to pay Marco Rossi when he's up for a new deal. So keep an eye on that name, because he could be some trade fodder this summer, but you never know. Maybe they look at and now adjust their numbers and say, hey, we can afford to keep him. So that'd be one name to watch for sure, but they've got a bunch of difference makers. Let's
so let me ask you, I got to ask you this, Frank. I got to ask you this. Okay. Doncic for Davis. Has there been anything more seismic than that?
I mean, when you wake up and you see NHL teams and NFL teams, and you see Patrick Mahomes tweeting about it, I mean, it's a massive, massive deal. And the amazing thing I come back to is, how is it possible that two players of that magnitude in the NBA don't have any trade protection, but Travis Hamonic has trade protection? So, like, I'm not to pick on any one guy. I saw the tweet and it made me laugh, so I'm regurgitating it. But why is it that so many, like, these teams twist themselves into pretzels, so concerned about keeping them or whatever it might? We got to do whatever we can to sign this guy to a deal. You end up hating yourself in such short order with all the no trade. When you've got 13 guys on your team that have no trade protection, like, what are you doing?
I agree.
It's nice to want to keep your guys, but like, I hate to sound like, oh, hey, I'm smarter than you, or I do it better or whatever. Like, I'd just be militant. Like, you've got to rise to the superstar level player to get any sort of something that's going to handcuff me. That's how I'd think about it.
I agree. And if we're talking about salary, and you're talking about meeting the salary demands, I'll use demands in a very loose way, then okay, good. But you're not getting the salary and the no move where we're going to be hindered. And Frank, when I was a manager, and I know the no move clause came in after I was managing, and really the no move clause came in because a bunch of NHL teams wanted to screw the players. Like, could you try to circumvent the spirit of it? But I would say to players, listen, I have no intention of trading you. I said, if you want a no trade clause, just understand that if you don't perform up to standard, I'm coming to you to waive it. So how are we going to deal with this? And every player I dealt with said, fair enough. We don't need the no trade. Just, you got to build trust. You got to build trust with the players and within your organization. That's what I think you have to do. And, if the trust got broken. And I'm talking on a macro level. That's why the no move clause came in. And I don't blame the players for saying we need this, because we see that short-term struggles. Oh, well, we got to get rid of this guy and we got to get rid of that guy. So I understand that, but if you don't have the trust, and it's interesting. But what a massive trade! I mean, it's just like, what? Luka Doncic got traded? Like, it's like, what? But then he says,
then,
I always thought I'd be a Maverick
like,
forever. Yeah, in the middle of the night, right?
I love how he posted on Instagram just all the missed calls from his GM. Like, yeah, I'm not picking up. It's amazing. Amazing. Let's bring in Tyler Remchuk for another edition of Fill in the Blank.
What's up, boys? Yeah, I was sitting at my kitchen table and I saw the tweet from Shams, and I had to do the thing where like you close your Twitter app and go check again. You're like, is this the real Shams account? It's like, yeah, 2.5 million. Like everyone was like, yeah, it'd have been hacked or something. I was absolutely insane. All right, boys, for Bet365, download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. I'll start you off with a Bet365 themed question because I'm looking at their odds to make the playoffs right now. The New York Rangers have a blank % chance of making the playoffs. Frank, you've always been really high on them, so I'm curious where your number is now that they've finished off the Miller deal.
60%. Look, it is, I'd say, just absolute muck in the Eastern Conference. Like, very little impresses me. And as well as the Detroit Red Wings have played, winning 6 in a row, and as much as the Columbus Blue Jackets have scrapped all year long, I know it's a 5-point gap today. It's 3 if the Rangers win their game in hand. I think JT Miller is going to take that team and propel them. And I'm not convinced that Chris Drury is done making moves yet.
Spicy. They still have money to spend. Craig, % chance the Rangers make playoffs.
You know, I was going to say a 67% chance, two out of 3. That's where I was going to go with it. And for the same reasons, JT Miller's going to go in there and, you know, he's got one thing on his mind. What can I do to help this team win? What can I do to help this team win? And he drags people into the fight. He drags you into the fight. He drags you into it. And, you know, you got Shesterkin. And I really believe that the New York Rangers have stabilized themselves, and you know they went on a good run there post Christmas, and now JT Miller I think continues that lift for the Rangers.
Just looking right here, plus 170 on Bet365 to make the playoffs, which is implied odds of about 37%. So both of you significantly higher than the book. So maybe a little value there on the New York Rangers to make the playoffs. Frank, you talked about Seth Jones being on your trade targets list. So he was the one name I was really stunned to see on there, but there was a second one. So let me ask you guys about Casey Middlestat, who comes in at number 5 on Frank's latest list. Frank, % chance the Avs move on from Casey Middlestat?
I'll say 30%. I just think, well, first off, the fact that Byram and Middlestat are both on the board 1 year after that 1-for-1 swap would give you an indication that I think neither team has been over the moon happy about the way that this has played out. I think Casey Middlestat has talent. I think I don't even think it's fair to say that his compete wanes, but definitely his consistency wanes. And I think that's driven Jared Bednar a little bit crazy this year. And you've seen him, his deployment has been all over the place. The one thing that Casey Middlestat has going for him that Bowen Byram does not is that he does have some cost certainty under contract for the next 2 years beyond this one. At a reasonable 5.75, I don't think it's a big reach for him to hit that target in terms of production. I would just, you didn't ask me this part, but like I would think he would make a ton of sense in a place like Calgary. We just talked about them and their quest for centers and point producers. If you could possibly buy low, which I'm not sure that that's the case, but if you could buy on a relatively average price point for Middlestat, he's a guy that I would take a chance on. But I think the Avs just have bigger things in mind than what he's brought to the table so far.
I think it's 100% that the Colorado Avalanche would like to trade Casey Middlestat for a lot of the reasons that Frank said. Now the question will be, I think it has to be a 2-part deal. I don't think they're going to get what they need in that spot by trading Casey Middlestat, but by trading Casey Middlestat, they can move out money to get money back in. I think they're a very interesting team to watch with respect to what they're doing. Because to me, to your point, Frank, so I would give it a 50-50 chance because again, you're taking on money, and I think it's got to be a 2-part deal for the Colorado Avalanche. Like for an example, like if you wanted to go short term, and I like what could they get for Casey Middlestat? I mean, we can go through the combinations and permutations, but if they could get a player And I mean, Calgary's not going to do this. If they could get a player like Nazem Kadri in there, and I know that's a pipe dream, but they need somebody that's harder, that's more consistent, that's in that spot. That's what Jared wants. That's what the Colorado Avalanche know that they need. And to me, that's why I say they'd 100% want to trade him, 50% that they do trade him. That's what I think.
I would have said JT Miller would have been such an interesting fit there.
Oh, sure.
If and only if you could imagine the two biggest alphas in the league and McKinnon and Miller in the same locker room.
I can imagine it.
I just don't know how they could do it. I don't know how they could.
Because they're wired to win. They're wired to win. See, what drove JT Miller nuts, and I'm not speaking for from my perspective, Elias Pettersson wasn't wired to win. That's what he's wired. JT's wired to win. So is McKinnon. I think it would be phenomenal. That's my view. I would love to see that.
Oh, I think the Colorado Avalanche, especially after making the Mikko Rantanen trade, I'd be very surprised if Chris McFarland did not at least inquire about JT Miller.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. I was torn on whether or not I wanted to ask this one because I feel like we've beaten the whole Pittsburgh Penguins topic a little bit to death. But you said something during the Seth Jones conversation that made me think about it a little bit more. The idea that teams now know with the cap going up, or maybe teams could be more willing to bring on money with the cap going up because they know a bit more about, the future and how they can kind of plan things. So the Penguins have already moved off of both of their pending UFAs, or at least their big name pending UFAs in O'Connor and Pettersson. Your question is, the Pittsburgh Penguins will make blank more deals before the deadline. And Frank, I know you've been big on they're not just going to snap their fingers and get out of some of this money. So Craig, I'll go to you first. How many more moves for Kyle Dubas before the deadline? Do you think now that teams know, again, $113 million in a few years, can they get rid of a Raquel or someone like that?
Well, I think that's a really good starting point is Raquel. Raquel last year you weren't gonna be able to trade him. This year, certainly, the way he's played. I mean, he's played outstanding. But I think there's also a trickle down. There's not a trickle down. There's a trickle across effect. You go and trade Raquel. I mean, what do you do with Sidney Crosby now? That's the equation there for me. It's not so much. I think Kyle Dubas is trying to subtly, okay, I'll trade my UFAs, I'll get draft picks here. Listen, is Kyle Dubas going to be bold? I think the chances of that are very low in terms of making moves that are going to move the needle for the Pittsburgh Penguins right now with Raquel. I just think it's very low.
I'll tell you what, when these cap numbers came out, it sent a shiver up my spine because, Craig, a couple weeks ago, we made a bet on this show where I said I would, for one day, wear a Barry Bonds earring if Kyle Dubas was able to trade one of his guys that makes $5 million or more without retaining any salary. I just don't think with the term on the deals that Rust, Raquel, Carlson, Letang, I don't think any of those guys are tradable right now, but I'll tell you what, it definitely gave me an odd feeling that I'd have to go to the jewelry store to get one earring to wear on a show one day, because it is, I guess, a little bit possible.
Good friend of mine, Frank Miles, grew up with him. We went out from Eastern Canada to Western Canada, and we were driving through the prairies, Saskatchewan. And we were driving, there was 4 of us, so we split the driving duties, and we're sitting there, and he goes, he says, I think I'm going to get a tattoo when we get out west. I said, you get a tattoo, I'll get my ear pierced. So I did get my ear pierced. There is a piercing there, like one of those bold 16-year-old moves. He never got a tattoo. I don't know what happened here. I thought I said, if you get a tattoo, I'll get my ear pierced. Somewhere along the line, I think I had a pierced earring there for about 10 days, Frank. And I go, what the hell am I doing? So I think you got to go for the piercing full on if that happens.
I hope it does.
I mean, everyone would love to see it, just like the dangly cross or whatever it is that you put in there. But yeah, I think they got some work to do, though, because it still is a lot to ask with Raquel. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been more talk about Filipino's concussion history. That's the first thing I think of with Raquel is this is a guy that has missed
Mm-hmm.
significant chunks of time that if you're acquiring, like you better know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah. All right. Last one I got for you quickly, actually. Ryan Hartman been offered an in-person hearing, which means the league can go more than 5 games. Ryan Hartman will get blank games for his play on Tim Stützle, Frank.
8.
Whew.
I think when you take a player's face and you smash it into the ice with your hand, there's only one thing that you're trying to accomplish. And with his rap sheet, that the league should and will send a strong message.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, this is look at what Morgan Riley got for the cross check on Ridley Gregg. And he was a first time offender. He didn't have a rap sheet like Ryan Hartman. Ryan Hartman has been on the edge. Like he's been in those discussions in the Department of Player Safety. Well, what do we do? Should we fine him? Do we call him? Should we suspend him? So Ryan Hartman has fully deserved 8 games in my view. And we see it. The Department of Player Safety keeps raising the bar. Last year, Frank, you can. I think my numbers are right. There was 5 or 6 appeals of suspensions, and not one of them was overturned. Which and it went to the commissioner. But he's given the Department of Player Safety the latitude to raise the bar. I think it gets raised again here.
Should be interesting. All right, boys, that's a wrap on this week's edition of Fill in the Blank, brought to you by Bet365.
Craig, are you a believer in the Red Wings? 14-4-1 under Todd McClellan.
Yeah, well, the Red Wings have picked up their level of play under Todd McClellan, and Steve Yzerman recognized that they needed a different experience in there to help their young players. I think they've moved forward in a really meaningful way. I think that's really good news for a team that has a lot of good young prospects. But Frank, you talked about it earlier. The East is kind of a muck. Can the Detroit Red Wings take advantage of it? The other
They couldn't
day,
last year.
They couldn't, but I think they're in a better place this year. I think they are in a better place this year. So we talk about the odds of them making the playoffs. I would say that their odds of making the playoffs are 40%, but I thought they were 0 before Todd McClellan got there. And 40 is better, and maybe it's 33%. But I like the way they play, and I think Todd has really given them a sense of real good, solid stability.
I think the Tampa Bay Lightning are ripe for the picking. I don't think anyone has talked nearly enough this year about. It's not necessarily a drop off because they've got such a good goal differential, but every year they've gone 104, 98. They were trending toward 93 points for a while now. And it's almost like because they have the stars that they do and because they've won the Stanley Cups, no one is willing to say the quiet part out loud, which is the Lightning have been a very average, mediocre team for a while now that people don't believe have an authentic chance to miss the playoffs. And I'm here to tell you, they do.
Hey, listen, I'm not going to disagree with that. That's kind of the muck in the East, right? Cap going up, though. Julian Brisebois has been a bold general manager. And, a big reason for them winning was some of his significantly bold moves. I don't think he's going to rest on it. And with the cap going up and some flexibility there, it'll be interesting to see what they do to try to give themselves a little bit more strength to not fall into a spot where they're out of the playoffs. Because you think about Tampa Bay at this point, it's kind of like where Detroit was at the, and I'm going to go back to Detroit 2011, 2012, 2013, clearly sliding in the direction downward, but not quite there yet. And then, they haven't made the playoffs for a long time since, it really did come to when it became obvious, right? And that I think that's where the Tampa Bay Lightning, with some really good young players, and they have Kucherov and Point and Hedman, and these guys are still good. They just don't have enough depth in their group. Can Julian Brisebois add some?
Yeah, with the cap going up, you think he would be able to, but at the same time, you're probably reaching a law of diminishing returns on your guys who are just continuing to get older and older. So is it better to continue to supplant that core? My theory on the Lightning has always been, as soon as they recognize that they're out, that Brisebois is going to tear down as fast as he possibly can. But there's still a long way from doing it. I mean, they just signed Jake Gensel to an 8-year deal or 7-year deal. Like, how? I don't know that they're seeing it that way.
Well, that's last summer, right? That's last summer. You to your point about Julian, he was bold in strengthening the team. I don't think Julian has ever looked at his team and but he kidded himself. So
Mhm.
he'll be bold the other way too. And
Mhm.
you move it forward. He got Ryan McDonough to waive no move clauses. He got players to waive no move clauses, and he just says, "Here's what we're going to do." So I agree with you, Frank. I don't think he's going to sit back. I think there's also another factor that's come in here, and the Pittsburgh Penguins find themselves, you're trying to accumulate picks. They have to trade picks and prospects. The reason the Washington Capitals are where they are is because they held on to draft picks and they made some really good draft picks. And a lot of those young players have come in now and been key contributors for them. If they would have traded those draft picks and those prospects, they'd be in the same place as the Pittsburgh Penguins. They wouldn't be able to have an uptick. And the uptick for the Washington Capitals is real. And, if you don't want to fall into that Detroit, falling off, and Tampa Bay, I think, sees themselves in the same light, you'll have to be bold if you recognize that you're not going to be able to make it.
Yeah. Well, let's close with this then. Still waiting for this team to be bold, a team that I think is going nowhere fast. And even if they win 4 games in a row for the first time this season, this week, the Buffalo Sabres will still be in last place in the Eastern Conference. Tage Thompson gets absolutely rocked with a headshot by Stefan Nason. And we see zero response from the Buffalo Sabres. Not even, I know that we heard Jason Zucker after the game say, well, we weren't really sure who did it or what happened. Just grab someone. Like, I'm not advocating for, over the top violence, but could someone on the Buffalo Sabres please show that they care? It was one sequence that summed up their entire sorry season, in my view, for a team that just doesn't look like they care.
Well, I think that when you get, the esprit de corps, that's what makes hockey so good, right? Is when you see that esprit de corps, and whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, the players, when they say we got to stick up for one another, we're there for each other, right? I mean, what was on display there for the Buffalo Sabres, Frank? There was not an esprit de corps. They weren't there for each other. They weren't there for Tage Thompson, their best player. Him and Darlene, I love, they're one of their very best players. And, Rob Ray, who they honored the other night in Buffalo, he must have been sick watching that. He must have been sick watching that, because Rob Ray, you think about what they honored him for and what everything that he did to help a team, develop that bond that we're in it together and we're going to protect each other, wasn't there for the Buffalo Sabres. Very disappointing.
Some, I thought, really touching words to Sabres owner Terry Pegula told Rob Ray. I never played hockey, but I imagine that if I did, I would have been very happy having you as a teammate. I just don't know what the Buffalo Sabres have or what they are. And I think watching Kevin Adams dissect and digest this without making any meaningful moves, look, I'd never advocate to do something just to do it, but it's clear that they're in love with their players more so than what the reality is of the sum of their parts. And I think they've got a lot of existential questions to ask. You mentioned Tage Thompson and Rasmus Dahlin. What is Owen Power? And what do they do moving forward? I think he's one of those guys you're going to have to ask some real questions about.
Frank, I'll go macro. I think the Buffalo Sabres showed us what they were all about yesterday. They showed us. They're a spiritless team. They're not going to have each other's backs. And they're 14 years out of the playoffs. I don't care if they win 6 in a row. They're 14 years out of the playoffs. I think Terry Pegula cares as an owner as much as any owner in this league. I really do. But I think you have to go into that area of full examination. First of all, the existential question of what are we and what do we want to be? Because what they are is a group that's not there for each other and a competitive group. They aren't. And number 2, what do you want to be is the bigger question. And how are you going to get there? Because it's just, that's a great hockey market in Buffalo, passionate owner. He's given people opportunities. And quite frankly, he's been failed time and time and time again. And listen, as I always say, go to the top. Terry Pegula's hired them. He's put them into place. it starts with him. And I said this earlier in the season. I said, go and try to understand what you did with the Buffalo Bills, because it's been fantastic. And what are the things that he did, and what are the things I did, and then recognize some of the things that you didn't do so well, and just move on. Acknowledge this didn't work, and we're going to move on. And the Buffalo Sabres, that to me is the first steps. But that was disappointing yesterday, watching that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Craig, what hasn't been disappointing is having you fill in for Jason Gregor. You mentioned there's, one too many Craig Buttons. Well, I don't know what that world would be like. Like I said, the world would be a better place and podcasts would be better. So really appreciate you sitting in for Jason, and always enjoy the time spent with you.
Yeah, same right back at you, Frank. Thanks for asking me. I mean, I love Jason, love you. And so when you asked me to be part of it and filling in, happy to do it. Happy to join you and just chat about what's going on around the league.
Appreciate it. That's episode 356 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Remember to use promo code NATION, NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Talk to you on Thursday.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.